Welcome in. This is The Spread. I'm Cameron Tarrant. That's SoCon John Hooper. As always, glad to have you in and listening and watching this next episode of The Spread. It is Memorial Day. Happy Memorial Day to everyone out there. And here in the upstate of South Carolina, it's been a rocky week for sure. We've had our moments of pure joy with the NCAA's decision to allow men and women's basketball and football programs to get back to practicing and to get back to their facilities starting June 1st. We'll talk about that decision. But here in the upstate, it's been a somber week the past week with the decision of Furman University to cut their men's baseball team and men's lacrosse team permanently. A decision that I don't think a lot of people saw coming. It was a shock to not just the alumni of Furman, but people that live in the area that know Furman, that enjoy Furman athletics, that follow Furman athletics. And just as a sports fan, just a devastating blow in that decision. John, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's the second oldest sport at Furman behind football. They've been playing, I think they played their first game in 1891. First season, I believe, was 1896. So just, really shocker because I think the only stoppages they had were the Great Depression and maybe the war, World War II. But other than that, I think they'd not seen any stoppages in the history of the sport there. And then COVID-19, brings the end or brings the axe down on the sport, or really two sports, but baseball is the one that everyone kind of around here associates with because Furman had made a real dedication to get back into the community, having the Southern Conference tournament at Floor Field, and having some of their games down there with I know they played Clemson in South Carolina several times down there over the years, and so not having that anymore is, I think Clemson's coach put it best. Monty Lee said it's not only devastating for Furman, but it's devastating for the state of South Carolina in terms of baseball, because that's one of your historic teams that you've developed, and Clemson developed a kind of a little rivalry with coming down here, and they won't have that anymore. And
because Furman and Clemson and South Carolina used to kind of all play each other, and every regular season kind of had almost like a three-way round robin title between the three schools type thing over at Floor Field. So
and they were always pretty good games. So not having that again, and I think it really. I know Furman basketball, made the dedication to get back downtown, and but it sounds like if you read between the lines that they were already having to make a long-term financial plan for baseball. If you read the press release, and it doesn't say that the sport would be cut down the road necessarily, but it doesn't necessarily, it just says that COVID-19 expedited the process, so to speak, to get rid of sports.
And we kind of talked about it. You mentioned to me the other day that as much of it's still a shock, it's still a surprise, but you could kind of see when they added, was it men's lacrosse, the athletic budget overall got really high.
Right. And they added the men's and women's lacrosse to bring in more students from up north, and what it ended up backfiring because no one foresaw the pandemic coming, and and it at the time it might have, and it was under a previous administration that actually did this. It wasn't the current
right,
and so. No fault of those in the administration now, but it was just going to be hard to manage that. And I think even it is surprising to see how much of a different age of college athletics we're moving into as far as college football is concerned, and cost, and upgrading facilities. And I think yes, Furman had a $700 million endowment, but according to the article, 100 million had been killed by the pandemic already.
Right.
That endowment. So, and obviously not all of that goes to football, but or I mean to sports. But so when you already have 100 million cut, then um, the way I look at it is it was a measure taken to protect football and basketball, to kind of prioritize those sports in order to not have to take away from them,
And,
at
and
least in the immediate.
and I understand that. Obviously football and basketball are much bigger draws as of sports, just in general. For most schools, your football and basketball programs are your big draws. But baseball is America's pastime.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't understand how you can just say, all right, we're going to get rid of baseball when I'm sure, having cut athletic programs, period, is bad enough. But to go after a major sport like baseball, it just
The third biggest sport at most schools,
yeah,
or second at some. I mean, depending on who you're talking about. I mean, I would imagine at Clemson, baseball is just as big as basketball in some
if not a
ways.
little bigger.
Yeah. Um, so, especially being in the South,
Yeah,
it's a big deal. And, and I was thinking about that too. Like, why weren't other sports considered?
correct.
But then you look at like soccer. Well, soccer is, probably the best sport at Furman. I mean, in terms of how many SoCon championships they've won, and
Right.
um, just how dominant they've been. So probably not going to cut that one. And women's sports are probably, I mean, they're off the table because of Title IX. I mean,
Yeah.
so you're looking at maybe track team or cross country, but Furman's been successful in those. So I think what it came down to is maybe they just looked at the success of each
Success.
program.
Yeah.
And, while Furman's been decent at baseball, they certainly haven't been, the cellar dweller in the SoCon. They haven't been to where some of those other programs are. And so maybe that's what just kind of tipped the scale, so to speak, in the direction of baseball.
Yeah, and my heart goes out for all of those players, especially the seniors, who coming up for next year. I know this maybe the seniors this season. Your heart goes out for them for with the pandemic and everything. Although I'm sure they would have been given an extra year of eligibility for next year, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just to all of a sudden the rug gets pulled out from under them and they're no longer able to come back and play baseball at Furman. I'm sure it's heartbreaking for those guys. Heartbroken for Brett Harker, the head coach there for the Paladins.
Well, I was thinking, if you just, I mean, it seems so final, to have no more baseball, or, I mean, I just wonder if there was a way that you could have brought it back in the future, or not, and the press release even addressed that. And, just not even having the option to bring it back
Yeah.
is kind of, if you I guess if you cancel a program, it's at least 5 years before you can bring it back, I think. And so, um, even if it was just 5 years, you'd still have the hope of having baseball again. But the way it is written, it's pretty final in the decision of it.
There is a petition going around up here in the upstate to have the administration bring back the baseball program, but I don't know how much of an effect that petition's going to have or anything like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously we all want it back. I mean, you know, and this is nothing against men's lacrosse. It just, you know, it's I think they had only had that sport 7 years or
Right.
something, and nothing against that sport at all. But, you know, you just think like you said, baseball is an American pastime, and, you know, just not having that sport, you know, is kind of tough because pretty much every school, well, the only school that I can think of other than Furman now that won't have baseball will be Chattanooga, which does not have baseball. So that, you know, that in and of itself is kind of strange, because now that takes, you know, where's the SoCon going to do with the baseball tournament? Are they going to keep it in Greenville or move it back to
Right.
Charleston?
Exactly, because then there's no longer a tie here in the upstate.
So my thing is that's probably going to move too, which is going to take some money away from Greenville.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think it's I think it's disappointing and sad in a lot of ways, I guess, uh, because you're losing not only Furman baseball, but you're
Yeah.
losing the SoCon tournament.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is unfortunately becoming a trend in college athletics right now. This isn't just a Furman issue. This is schools all across the country are cutting athletic programs. ECU, East Carolina University, up in Greenville, North Carolina, just cut 4 different athletic programs. They cut their men's swimming and diving teams, their women's swimming and diving teams, and their men and women's lacrosse teams. Or excuse me, tennis teams, not lacrosse, tennis teams. But still, I mean, they basically cut half of their athletic programs right
Mm-hmm.
now.
And the way I read the article, they're down to 16 sports,
Correct.
um, which gives them just enough to maintain conference membership of Conference USA. So they can't afford to have any more sports cut, obviously.
Right. And it's not like, I mean, because of the conference that they play in, they're a smaller school. They don't have, I mean, their football team's not great. They
Mm-mm.
don't really get that big draw that a lot of other schools get with their football programs. Basketball, I don't know how well they are in men or women's basketball, probably.
Yeah, that might have been a sport on the chopping block. I'm
Yeah,
sure. Um,
probably
you know,
probably
they
should have
haven't
gotten
been
rid of football.
right. They haven't been successful in basketball, and I don't know how long. I mean, so, you know, it's shocking because you really, other than baseball, I can't think of a sport that East Carolina in the past 4 or 5 years has really been very good at. So, um, I can't speak for their soccer programs or their men's and women's tennis, but I mean, you'd have to imagine they'd been as successful as their football
Right,
program.
right. So it's just becoming, unfortunately, this is becoming a trend right now with everything with COVID-19 and
Is
the
it
children.
Bowling Green that cut programs as well?
I believe so. There, yeah, Bowling Green up in
Cut
Ohio.
baseball.
There's been a few others. Mainly, there's been a lot of smaller, maybe D1, D or smaller D1, D2, D3 schools that have had to cut some programs just because they with the money lost this year because of the pandemic. I mean, they just don't have the athletic budgets to cover it.
Do you think you know, are you seeing signs of what might happen if college football season does not happen?
Yeah, and that's a segue that we could get into. How there are some states, some schools that are deciding now not to play their football seasons. Now you had, for instance, we were talking about it right before the show. The state of Michigan put in effect that no athletic programs from schools can compete if students are not on campus. Okay, I agree with that. That's fine. But then
Mm-hmm.
you have the president of Michigan University, probably the biggest university there in that state, coming out and saying that they're not going to have students come fall, which means that there's not going to be a football season for the Wolverines.
Yeah, I mean, that would be shocking, as to me is the whole state of California saying they
Yeah.
want, because here you have a program that is the most all-time winningest,
Hmm.
the leader in all-time wins in college football history, not having a season. And I don't know when the last time, Michigan has not had a season. I would imagine it was probably either the war or the depression or something like
Yeah,
that. But
something around. Yeah.
um, not having one of your traditional, type teams, it'd be the same as not having Notre Dame or, um, so I think that would be a big deal. I mean, and what does the Big Ten do about that? Because Michigan always factors in whether, they win it or not. Ohio State usually wins it anyway, I guess some people would say, but
And if the state of Ohio opens up, if Ohio State students go back in the school, and if Ohio State's playing football, there goes one of the biggest rivalries in college football this season
mhm.
in Ohio State, Michigan at the end of the year, which is always a fantastic game to watch.
Yeah, it's always a pretty, 90% of the time it's a good football game.
Yeah.
It's something that the whole nation kind of rallies around to watch, just like an Auburn Alabama type game. So there would be that missing space in the schedule on that particular Saturday, that rivalry, Saturday, and um, well, it's going to screw up a lot of schedules. I guess
Yeah.
you add in another game. I mean, I'm not even sure what the Pac-12 will do. Um,
Well, it
so
doesn't sound like many of the Pac-12 schools might even play. Depending on California's decision, Oregon doesn't doesn't look like they're going to be in any rush to get students back to play these different sports come fall. Um,
that may just be
Washington,
waiting on basketball season.
maybe. I mean, they may wait until the next spring, but for baseball season and things like that. I mean, who knows? It's just it's weird. It's weird to see certain schools, especially like schools like Michigan, big name schools that are known for their football programs, coming out and saying as of right now that they're not planning on having a football season.
But there's a difference here. I mean, when your governor, like in California, speaks for you, there are some schools in that state that are struggling more than others. It's not going to hurt probably UCLA or USC
Right.
to not have a season, but it might hurt, Cal Poly or UC Davis not to have a season, or these schools. So when a governor speaks and says something that important, I think they have to realize that they're running the risk of certain schools not in being in operation when they come back.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't affect every school the same way. So, and it's not the school's fault that there's a pandemic. It's not
Correct.
the smaller school's fault, so not not allowing them to have a football season is more detrimental than just, I think in a lot of ways are just as detrimental as keeping students safe. I mean, um, because if some of these schools they don't just have the funds to keep this going,
Right.
so then you've got students that just all of a sudden they don't have a school to go back to. I mean, um, so I think there's a lot of there's questions not only of health and safety, but there's questions of financially, you know, if you're a student at one of these smaller schools, what are you going to do if there's no school to come back to? What if you're a student athlete? What are you going to transfer it?
Right.
How's the NCAA gonna regard that? I guess is what
Right. Exactly. And at least we know, with the NCAA's ruling the other day, a few days ago, about
Mhm.
letting football programs, men and women's basketball programs, come back starting June 1st, start on campus, activities and things like that. We at least know we're going to have some sort of college football season.
Mhm.
What it's actually going to look like is going to be left up in the air for the next couple of months, determining on what schools actually decide to open up and compete on the field. Clemson's looking like there may not be any concern there with the Tigers. The president of Clemson's already got a plan in place of getting students back on campus and everything. It looks like Dabo and the Tigers will have a football season. But what about other teams around the country? I mean, what is the college football season going to look like if there's a major chunk of programs that aren't competing?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that every school in this state is planning on having students back in the fall and football. Furman announced it. I know South Carolina has. So, yeah, but there's some states that, like California already just said we're not even going to have it. So I'll be interested to see what conferences it affect. I mean, obviously it's going to affect the Pac-12.
Yeah.
Now, like the state of Indiana said they were coming back, and Purdue is like put in measures to be back on campus. So
good, because we need Purdue and Indiana football.
Boiler Pete or whatever his name is, back out there beating his plastic drum or whatever he has. So I don't know. But see, if you don't have Michigan in the Big 12, I mean, whatever it is, Big 11.
The Big 10. I mean, it's the Big 10.
Yeah, I know. I'm just
with 14 teams.
It'll actually be 10 now. I'm just kidding.
Probably.
Yeah. So if you don't have them, you don't know what. I mean, we're assuming Ohio State's going to be back in school. So I think more of the states where, like in the South, I know that I've seen to be more intent on getting back to football season. And, I think people are starting to realize now if you don't have football, this might not affect your school, but it affects the brand of college football.
Yeah.
And in some ways, protecting that brand is vital in a lot of ways for an economy, state economies, and the national economy. So.
I mean, you think about it, especially like a school like Clemson, who, is a fairly large institution, but it's not the University of South Carolina. It doesn't have the student body that a University of South Carolina has. The town of Clemson's a very small town, and the town of Clemson depends heavily on those 5 months in the fall for to make it through the rest of their year. And they really depend on the students being on campus. I read an article the other week about how there are a lot of restaurants and things in the town of Clemson that are really struggling because there are no students there right now. And then that whole town depends on the students being at school.
You make a good point, because some of these schools aren't in big metropolises. We're not talking about these like St. John's in New York or something like that, or you're talking about like a Boone, North Carolina for Appalachian State. You're talking about like Auburn, Alabama is not a huge place. So they're, by and large, at least throughout the Southeast, there's more smaller towns that are actually quote unquote college towns. That they're the lifeblood is the college. They just built the businesses, restaurants, everything around the college, and it generates everything else. So when you don't have that, you're basically taking a whole small town and you're basically just damaging their whole economy for a year.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of these, you got restaurants and bars and things like that really depend on not only the student bodies, but depend on these fall athletic programs like football and basketball to help really drive the entire town or city or whatever. It's not just about the institutions themselves, but the local businesses and things like that.
Yeah, and so I think there's a much deeper impact that not having football could have. And like we've said last week, we I think you and I would agree that we both want to keep everyone safe. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just it's kind of a tightrope you have to walk as to where, um, and I guess that's where you have to just depend on our healthcare workers to figure it out and hope they figure it out in time to be able to save some of these programs because
Right.
I think that if we don't have a football season, it won't affect it as much if as long as we have one. I think, and if you had to wait till the spring and have one, I think a lot of schools would still be okay. But I
Mhm.
just don't think you can just cancel the whole season and not have it all together.
Yeah, I agree. But it does look like we're not going to have to worry
Yeah.
about that because it does look like we are going to have some sort of college football season. But maybe something we can speculate on is what it's actually going to look like. I mean, you mentioned it. You've got the Pac-12 that may not even compete. You may have teams up north in the Big Ten, even maybe the some of the like the American Athletic Conference teams, um, even ACC teams, Boston College, Syracuse, like those teams up north may not
And how
compete.
much of this is going to, I mean, I guess this is one of the things we don't even know really about the virus, but how much of it depends on climate, how much of it,
Yeah.
there's different climates throughout the country. I mean, so you're looking at a lot of different dynamics to figure out if they can have football or if they can't, or
So who knows? And I think you've seen that geographically in the South. Most states in the South, universities are coming out and saying, "Yeah, we're going to open up. We're gonna get football up and going."
Yeah, yeah, and um, you and I both know it stays pretty hot, up until
Yeah.
sometimes November here.
Yeah.
I mean, so the flu season, what I'm basing it on is if you base it on something, the flu season hits here at a different time than it hits, Rhode Island or, Boston. So it's going to, and that's where it's going to be that, it's going to be different for different states because, now California, is really an awkward for them to kind of say it because it is traditionally, while it's not as hot as it is here, um, it's still pretty warm. Uh,
Yeah.
so it would have been more understandable if North Dakota would have said that than than California about the virus, coming out and just already in May canceling the season or basically canceling students being on.
Yeah. So who knows? I'm just glad that there has been a decision made to allow for football, for basketball to start up, and hopefully play on time. Whether that means for FBS if all 130 however many teams play, or if only a fraction of that actually competes. At least there will be something. Same with college basketball, both men and women's. Um, later on October, November when they start up. So I mean, at least we have that good news to kind of hold on to for right
Mm-hmm.
now. That decision by the NCAA has been made because I don't know about you, John, but for me, I was actually kind of a little pessimistic in the fact that I thought honestly the NCAA may not even if they did say anything that they leave it up to individual institutions or they might say no sports at all. I was
Well,
because of the way the NCAA is run. I was a
I
little
don't know how much control they have of what states say. I mean,
right.
so if the government or the governor of your state says you can't play, and the NCAA says you can, well, it really doesn't matter what the NCAA says.
Yeah, that's true.
You're going to have to go by your
New
state
state.
politicians. Um, so I think that's why they left it up to the state's, government and governor.
Yeah.
So one of the good things I think about the South is we were some of the first to put in the stricter protocols, to begin with. And then I know Georgia opened up, started opening up back before we did. But I think one of the things I'll watch is how they, each state's doing like the different phase thing. And I know North Carolina's like in phase 2 now. And so, if this thing doesn't rev back up again, will be another positive sign for going forward. But our state governor, Governor McMaster, has already said that, in not so many words, that he planned on, things being back to normal with schools and college and fall.
And again, our hearts go out to all the Furman baseball, lacrosse guys, and athletes all across the country that have had to deal with the fact that they're not going to be able to go back to their institution, their school, and play their respective sport at that same school that have been cut. But especially here close to home, John, those Furman guys, our heart goes out to them, coaches and staff. And, we both know the voice of Paladin baseball pretty well.
Yeah.
And, Dan's pretty crushed about it as well as he should be. But, so our heart goes out to him, but at least he's still got football and basketball to look forward to. And hopefully at some point in the near future, maybe Furman can bring back baseball.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really feel for, the student athletes, but also Coach Harker and, those guys that have given so much to the program. It's just really, sad. I mean, because I do think, the program had made really several positive strides forward.
Yeah.
And, we're ready to, even this season that they didn't get to be able to continue and play on. You saw some signs that Furman was going in the right direction. And, I'll always have those memories of, I guess it was 2005 when Furman made the run as the 8th seed to win the Southern Conference tournament. At that time was the lowest seed to win the SoCon tournament until Wofford won it a few years later. I think they were the 9. But yeah, it was kind of a remarkable run. And I believe they beat Georgia Southern in the championship game. So just memories like that. And then going on and playing Georgia Tech in the regional, and then in Michigan as well. Playing 2 pretty good games, losing both those games, but playing pretty competitively. Will certainly be missed, moments like that.
Absolutely. Well, John, it's been fun, man. We'll get back together and talk some more sports soon, and hopefully we'll have plenty of good things. No more bad things to talk about. Hopefully only positive things when we return. For SoCon John Hooper, I'm Cameron Tarrant. This has been The Spread. Thanks for watching The Spread podcast. You've just seen the highlights from this week's episode. Go on over to SoundCloud.com and you can listen to the entire episode absolutely free. Just search The Spread with Cameron Tarrant. Thanks for listening.